I think especially once we started offering content as a service, it was kind of like, okay, if you're selling content as a service and your content for your own brand is not high end or experiential or make you feel any, emotion, it's like, how am I going to have any faith that you're going to be able to do that for my brand when you know nothing about it coming into it? You know what I mean? And so I think that's where that importance kind of lies there. And to go back to the ROI thing, it is very hard to measure the ROI of content. Like I think there's this Gary Vee quote that I think about often where he says, all right, well, tell me the ROI of your mother. Like you can't tell me the calculable ROI of your mom, but you know that your mom has insane, infinite ROI. And it's kind of the same thing with content. It's like, it's very hard to get down to the nitty gritty and do reporting and, all these things to like figure out exactly how much revenue is generated from content. The way I like to look at a content is it's the oil that makes the machine go.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. And in this episode, I have a great friend of mine, Andrew Deitsch. Now, if you haven't heard the name, you've definitely been influenced by this guy because he has worked with hundreds of e-commerce brands, personal brands, and has produced content that has billions of views as well as hundreds of thousands, if not dozens of millions of dollars of conversions directly attributed to his work and the work that he's done with his team. So you definitely want to strap into this episode because we're going to be unpacking exactly how to create content in this day and age and how to actually convert that to not only get the publicity, the influence, but also the monetization aspects that most influencers and creators are looking for nowadays. So with that said, my good friend, Andrew.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that. It's a great introduction. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, sure thing. The intro is easy. It's the hard work that you've put in over the years and obviously the dynamicness of you being able to do it for multiple offers, multiple brands. That's the hard work. The intro is relatively easy.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it, dude. I'm excited to be here in Miami.
Yeah, sure thing. So you're here in Miami for the music festival, right?
Yeah, coming here for a couple of days. Going to go to the Afterlife event tonight, so I'm very excited about that. It's really cool, the Afterlife stuff, because they've been starting to incorporate a lot of the really high-end graphics and really high-end screens with the music. And for someone like me that's like obsessed with, content, and this, especially I've been starting to dabble a little bit into 3D stuff.
Man.
It's like almost kind of just like this really amazing art show. Like it's like you've got these insane visuals mixed with really good music, and it's honestly, it's beautiful. I'm always chasing that kind of stuff.
That's pretty cool. It's like digital art basel, basically.
Dude, for real, it kind of is. I think that there's a lot of integrations for these artists that are making these super amazing 3D stuff. A lot of them are already kind of dabbling in the NFT world and stuff like that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for that type of thing to just accelerate.
Yeah, so when someone like you that's very into creative and understands the business side of creative, I'm actually curious, what are your thoughts on the production and all the backlog to put that on? Like how much really goes into it? Because you've produced so many different ads and pieces of content. I'm curious your perspective of what it takes to put on a music festival.
Dude, yeah. Well, I actually have a couple of friends in the industry. One of my friends, he is like a manager for a lot of big artists, and
okay,
it's pretty cool to see the back end, because a lot of times people are kind of like confused by what's actually like happening. Like, okay, this DJ's playing this thing, but then there's like synchronized visuals. So like, is it pre-recorded or pre-planned or whatever? And basically it's kind of this like mashup of like, okay, the DJ's got the songs and then there's visuals that match those songs. So like the DJ sometimes is like a producer and they're making these songs. So they hire specific artists to make graphics for their specific songs. It's almost kind of like a modern day music video in a ways. Cause it's like back in the day, you kind of like paid a bunch of money out of pocket to make this like visual version of a song. Mm-hmm. And I think especially in like the EDM world, there's not really like lyrics or like a storyline.
Yeah.
So then the visual element of it, you still want that. And so you hire like really talented 3D artists, and not necessarily 3D, but 3D is kind of like the cool, the most cutting edge stuff. And then even just to actually run those productions, it's from a technical perspective, I'm very constantly impressed by just like, wow, I can't believe that I'm seeing this clear of graphics without compression in real time at a resolution that's this high. Like it's honestly like mind blowing. So yeah, there's a lot of effort that goes in the back behind the scenes. Mad respect to all those visual artists and everyone, conducting that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty intense. And so was the music thing and just, having experienced in festivals and all that kind of stuff, is that what started your journey in creative, or how did that bridge kind of happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I started in creative, like, not as an editor. I always loved capturing stuff. And I think this is where I kind of, maybe I'm a little bit separate from some other people in the content world that maybe come at it from a filmmaking perspective or from a gear perspective first. I think there's a lot of gearheads that get very nerdy about like what's possible with cameras and what's possible with computers. And I am in that world now, and I can get down with some nerdy stuff. But in the beginning, it was more for me just like a medium of being creative and like making dumb little videos. And honestly, like, I started making stuff on Snapchat stories when that was a thing. Like I would travel somewhere and make like a little story, and like it was easy because I didn't have to edit, because I was literally just, as the day went on, shared what was happening and things like that. And I think that's kind of how people still kind of treat stories. But at the time, that was like such a new. Snapchat was the first thing that had stories, and then Instagram copied it, and everyone else copied it. Yeah. So that was like my first, I'd say, like real kind of thing where I was trying to maybe gain some sort of audience there. Right. And then that kind of pivoted to eventually. Do you know Ryan McGinn? Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Ryan, actually, funny enough, he back in the day, he used to have a YouTube channel about men's fashion and men's style. I don't know if anyone knows that, but that's how I originally found him, because I traveled to Italy. I lived there for a little while over a summer, and I remember coming back and just feeling like I was so underdressed the whole time I was there. I'm like, dude, I need to like at least try to up my fashion game a little. Yeah. So I found Ryan, and then he was kind of starting to pivot away from the men's fashion into like personal branding and just kind of showing how to like grow your channel and like edit videos and stuff. And so he had a small, very small event, mastermind, whatever you want to call it, in St. Petersburg. And I went down to that, and he kind of I told him this like a couple months ago. I was like, dude, like you kind of started my like journey in this, because he showed us like very simply he had like a GoPro, and he was just filming his day, like almost like little vlogs. And then he showed us how easy it was to edit on Premiere. And at the time, I had just started my podcast, but I didn't have a video element of it. And I knew that eventually I wanted a video element, but I just wasn't there yet. And it was like 2017. And it's funny because now podcasts are still really big, but even in 2017, I remember thinking, is it too late to start a podcast? Which is kind of funny. Yeah. Because we're here, 7 years later almost, and podcasts are still going strong.
Yeah. And I remember podcasts back in the day used to be like, it was basically like a flex that you weren't listening to music. Like, it was this weird thing of like, oh, you still listen to music? I listen to only podcasts. Like, yeah, it was a weird functionality of the podcast app at the time. So I remember that era that you're talking about, where there wasn't so much of a crossover, and it's just exploded, especially with short form content and stuff like that. And so, yeah, here we are 7 years later, still doing podcasts.
Exactly. And I think the podcast as a medium is not really going to go away anytime soon. Like, I think it's going to change and evolve, and it has already. But the idea that we can just sit down and have this type of conversation is so powerful, regardless of if the cameras are on or are off. But the fact that the cameras are on, people can watch this. And then what I think is like so great about a podcast, it allows us to have a conversation, have maybe even a little bit of a debate. And then if we want to, we could then take what we like learned, either clip it or actually make another piece of content from it. Comedians, like there's a lot of comedians that have podcasts where they kind of almost like start to flesh out ideas on the podcast, and then eventually those become like real bits in their like actual set that they put on Netflix or whatever. So I think like podcasts are a great way to kind of just less pressure, but still provide value, and like your super fans and the people that are like your biggest fans that just want to consume everything you put out are going to be, in that audience.
Yeah. And I think what's really cool too, when people actually commit to the podcasting, because I know you help a lot of people with podcasts that have been on your podcast in the past. And it's also like a journey log in a way, because the perspective changes as you grow as an entrepreneur, as a creator, or even just someone logging something else like finance. I know I have a couple other shows, but it's also like a time-stamped easy way to do so you can look back at what kind of conversations were you having? Where was this person at in their growth? But to the audience, they get to see that too. And I think that's something that I really care about, is not only seeing my growth, but hopefully the language and the conversations that we have are transferring over to other people, and they're, experiencing growth in their lives. So then it's a rising tide that raises all ships.
Totally, because I mean, it's kind of the common thing that you hear. You're the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. And so if you can artificially spend time with people that are at levels way above you, that's been a huge game changer for me. Like, I feel like because I can listen to podcasts that are at a higher level technically or different things, I start to learn the jargon. I start to learn the way that those type of people talk, and why they are successful and why they've gotten to where they are.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think about the types of videos that I'm inspired to make right now, and they're kind of for the younger version of myself. It's still kind of trying to figure a lot of this stuff out. And, it's easy to get down on yourself and be like, I'm not as far as I want to be, but it's also so inspiring to look back and be like, damn, like 5 years ago, I would be so proud of myself and so stoked about the position that I'm in right now.
Yeah, for sure. And especially when you go to do trips and stuff like that. Like, I'm actually going to St. Petersburg and in Canada here shortly. That's going to be the time that I actually reflect on, hey, what was done over the past 6 months, 7 months? And it's easy to do so when you look at all the content, the production, and all that kind of stuff that's pushed. I think it's even a better feedback loop for the entrepreneur putting it out. But to your point, it's an easy medium where people can actually gather content. They can gather the information that they're seeking from people that they actually can connect with. So let's double click into that for a sec about podcasting specifically. So obviously, I was a little bit ignorant when I started my podcast. I just bought a bunch of stuff. I was telling you prior to the show, like, I just paid for all the stuff, had someone build the studio, and then showed up. But there's other ways to do it. I remember first doing it like on my phone, just logging my day and just literally doing the audio. So what are some things that people can do now, because podcasting has changed, to have a simple barrier or a low barrier to entry rather than a simple way to get started? And then what should they be talking about overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, honestly, there's a few different ways to kind of approach it. I think that as an audio listener and someone that listens to a lot of podcasts, there's a certain threshold of audio quality that I'm willing to put up with. But we were actually talking about this earlier. As long as the information that I'm listening to is high enough that I'm willing to put up with the bad quality. So, for example, like, we were talking about the All In podcast. Yeah. Not that their audio quality is bad. I actually think it's pretty good. But I mean, for the most part, I think they're just using like AirPod Pros as their microphones, and, they're, zooming in from wherever they're at in the moment. And so the audio quality sometimes isn't like amazing, but I'm willing to put up with it because I want to hear what these guys have to say. And I think also they've already conducted themselves as a source of authority. Like, obviously they have a lot that they can point at as far as why you should listen to them. Yeah. So having a professional set and like all this stuff, it's not necessarily something that they need in order to have people perceive them as valuable to listen to. But on the other hand, if you're a brand new show and you don't really have a lot of things stacked up in your favor, you can do things to stack the perception in your favor just by doing some simple things. So, investing in a microphone that, I think there's great microphones out there that are like $100, and just recording in a room that has better sound treatment, like, because you could record on a really amazing microphone, but if you're in a super open space that's got like really bad echo, and for example, if we're doing it on video and you got really bad light, it's like people just aren't going to really resonate with it. And they're like, this guy's not even really trying that hard. It's like, why would I spend an hour with this guy when he's not even willing to spend a couple $100 on making his setup look nice, Yeah. And there's some arguments to be made on both sides, because like on one side, if you're like really busy and you're already kind of successful and you're like, I don't really have time to do all this stuff, people should just want to listen if they want to listen, and I'll just, talking to my phone or whatever. But there's also something to be said about, the content aspect of it. It's like, okay, why are we doing this? If we're doing this so that we can, create some more content out of it, or have short clips or things like that, it's like you want to set a good first impression, with people that are going to be watching those things and things like that. And if you have a really professional set here, but it's not like you had to invest, tens of thousands of, well, with camera, I did, but yeah, but like just to get in looking to a good point, you could get a setup for a couple $1,000 or whatever that's good enough, and then upgrade it over time, things like that.
Yeah.
but at least just having a really professional looking, especially if you're doing in person, not only does it make the guest feel important and feel that they're on something that's worth, giving it their all and showing up and maybe even flying in or whatever. So yeah, that was kind of a long ramble on just kind of some importance of, some things to think about.
And I think some context behind that too. We there's a lot unpacked that we can do to unpack that, which is one, like if you don't have all the equipment, all that kind of stuff, there's podcast studios typically in any big city. And that's what I used to do in Austin all the time, or I would do in, even here in Miami. I've done it a few times if I didn't want to do it here at my condo. And those rates are maybe $250 to $500 for a 2-hour session.
Yeah.
Very easy to accomplish instead of having all this set up, have the camera crew, have all those kind of things and elements. It's just, hey, sit down, have your guests and actually see if that's the form that you want to, chat through. That's the first thing that I would tell people to do if they're trying to get started in podcasting. But if they know, like I knew that I needed the studio, I knew that I needed to be able to pump out a lot more content. That's why I went and did the investment into studio and team and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really, really good point. But the second point you made, which was the content multiplication from the effort here. And so things right now, if I put all this energy in, you put all this energy into this 2-hour, session that we have together, that gets multiplied out. And thinking of that end user that's going to watch it is what gets the views. So let's talk about the post-production and how you've been able to accumulate billions of views. Some of it was ads, of course, but a lot of it being organic. Let's talk about that side because some people don't really understand the power of podcasting just on distribution.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, from the short form side of things, podcasting has been a huge aspect in like what type of short form content is even out there. Like if you are looking at, if you're on the kind of business side of like Instagram or TikTok or whatever, probably you're seeing podcast clips as like 20% of your feed, maybe even. It kind of depends on what your feed looks like, I guess. But I think it kind of shifted a bit too from kind of the talking head, like classic Alex Hormozy caption kind of thing to podcast clips, because it was also like an easier way for some of these things to happen organically. And then I also feel like from a short form perspective, part of the allure of an in-person podcast is the idea that someone could be kind of like a fly on the wall and listening in. And I think inherently we kind of, as humans, we want to like kind of listen in on, maybe like you're sitting at a restaurant by yourself and you're a little nosy and you're like listening to maybe what the people next to you are talking about or whatever. And there's some kind of like innate thing in most humans, I feel like, to kind of almost want to do that a bit. And so it kind of maybe hacks into that part of our biology of like wanting to hear something that maybe we wouldn't be able to hear otherwise or whatever, especially like a conversation that's in person. And then I think with the short form, it kind of just hijacks that more because we've been taught that, okay, these people, like the context of someone sitting down in a nice area with a podcast microphone, you kind of just understand like immediately, oh, this is a piece of a podcast of a longer form thing. And I think it's a great kind of gateway drug into anyone's content because it's like, okay, I'm consuming this tiny little piece of, nugget of information, if you will. People are saying nugget with podcasting. Take this little golden nugget and, then they have the choice to either scroll past and, they might think, oh, that was a great piece of content. Scroll. And maybe you come up again and they go, oh, this guy's great content. Scroll. Yeah. Eventually, maybe you follow them. Eventually, maybe you end up listening to the whole show and subscribing to the whole show. So it's the problem with podcasts is it's very hard to just share a podcast. I think nowadays it's a little more acceptable, but think about 2017, I was doing it, especially even with no video element, just audio. Sharing a multiple hour long sometimes file with someone, it's like, what are they? If they're not used to this idea of like, oh, I'll put it on when I'm in the car, I'll put it on when I'm exercising or whatever. It's like this idea was still kind of like foreign to people. But now I think people realize how listening to a podcast fits in with their life. Maybe I do it while I'm cleaning. Maybe I do it when I wake up and I'm, messing around in my room. Maybe I do it when I'm driving. Maybe I do it when I'm doing cardio, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think the short form is, like you said, the gateway drug, but also it's that first impression.
Totally.
So that way they actually commit the time of an hour, 45 minutes, whatever the length of the time is, because that right there is the audience building. It's that element. It's that perception. It's everything with the effort coming out and the energy exerted that's going to translate.
Exactly.
Sometimes that's invisible to people. And it took me a while to figure out that, hey, there's an energy line between us, an energy line between the camera and I, that exerted has to connect to the other side. And so that is the nugget, I think, that most business owners, entrepreneurs that are trying to start anything like this can probably take away is, hey, don't just have the conversation, but think through the post-production by setting it up right the first time.
Exactly. And I mean, to be honest, like the video element that we're recording right now, we're recording it all horizontal because we're going to post the full thing on video to YouTube or something. And with long form content, it's like horizontal just makes the most sense. But,
yeah,
you know, having the vertical clips is like, you know, probably it's almost arguably more important than the horizontal full thing. Cause like I'd rather someone watch a clip and then go listen/watch to the full thing, but I don't need them to be glued to the screen for the whole hour of the podcast. Like that's more of just a supplementary thing. And it's kind of interesting to see how podcasts have shifted to be more of a YouTube and Spotify video sort of game. Because before it really was just like a radio, like people didn't even know what podcasts were. They were like radio broadcast shows, like got this internet radio show. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing right now, but it's also now it's not really an internet radio show. Now it's more of like a talk show or, you know, something along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think a lot of people forget that that's the aspect and that's the medium that they're tapping into. Like if you watch a sitcom, like one of my favorite sitcoms growing up was Everybody Loves Raymond. Those intervals were 20, 30 minutes, and then commercial, and then go back to the 20, 30 minute thing and then commercials and da-da-da-da. So it's the same kind of attention span that I see with long form. It's like if you don't have them for that first 10, 15 minutes, they're going to drop off and probably not come back because we've been programmed to think that way. And then subsequently it's the short form that does that. But let's talk about how you even got into short form and distribution from podcasting, because you started your own podcast in the beginning, right?
Yeah. And this was before IG Reels. This was before TikTok.
Right.
This was IGTV was still a thing, if you remember. Oh my gosh, yeah. A little bit of a relic that didn't last too long, but it basically kind of became the Reels product.
Yeah.
But basically, so I started making videos based on kind of what Ryan was doing in the beginning. Like he was kind of doing these little daily vlog kind of things. So I started to get a little bit better at making small videos. And then I had a couple of friends, actually mainly who I met through the podcast, just kind of meeting interesting people that were like, hey, you make like videos for stories, like could I pay you to make some videos? And I'm like, yeah, of course. So started kind of going down that rabbit hole. And then with the podcast, like I said, I was making content, but it wasn't video content like this where we're, you know, filming the whole episode. It was kind of more like little promo stingers or like little graphics with like the guest with like a quote from the episode or, you know, little things. Cause also, like I said, in Instagram Reels and TikTok wasn't really a thing yet. So the form of how to actually promote a podcast wasn't really fully matured yet.
Yeah.
And then that's when, so I had my own show, and then I started working with my buddy Richard for a couple of years, who, he's a paraplegic, and we had a YouTube channel together, called Wheels to Walking, where he was, the guy on the channel, basically helping wheelchair users regain independence, quality of life, all that stuff. Show that, you know, cause a lot of these guys that get injured, it's a lot of guys, because men typically are going to do some more dangerous behaviors, riding motorcycles, riding ATVs, jet skis, mountain biking, all these things where you can break your back. And a lot of these, and obviously I'm not saying that there aren't women out there that get paralyzed, and also there can be just car accidents and crazy traumatic things that can happen. But a lot of times it is like guys doing like kind of reckless things. And so it's like, okay, now you're at this point where you're a young guy, you're laid up in this hospital bed, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. Am I going to live in my parents' house forever? Does my dick work? Am I ever going to be able to, you know, date again? Am I going to get married? Am I going to have kids? Like, a lot of life is uncertain. And so Richard was kind of this like beacon of like, you can be jacked, you can be cool, you can live by yourself, you can have an independent lifestyle, be a freaking badass guy in a wheelchair. And that's what our channel was about. So basically we grew that to like 100,000 subscribers in a couple years. Few million views. I think at this point it's probably in like around 10 or 11 million maybe at this point. There's some videos on there that are like very evergreen, how to fly with a wheelchair. You know, like people are constantly looking that type of information up. How do I get on a wheelchair, or how do I get on a plane with my wheelchair, things like that. So a lot of cool educational stuff, a lot of entertainment stuff. We mix that quite a bit. And then we started the Wheels to Walking podcast, which was basically just we were co-hosts. We did a similar kind of thing as this. And that's when the clips started kind of rolling. Because it's like, okay, we've got this YouTube channel that's successful.
Right.
People are tapping into the podcast. But it was still around the time when like Rogan was doing clips, but they were YouTube clips. They were like horizontal, 10-minute sometimes clips. And they were great. You know, you could have a great thumbnail and title on those videos. You know, like how this person successfully tricked the KGB into doing X, and you're like, oh wow, I got a lot. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah. And then it eventually gets you to watch the full episode. But we were doing kind of clips like that, and then once I started at 4Media, I split ways with Wheels to Walking, and we started the 4Media podcast. And that was kind of when like Reels were really starting to take off, and we started doing a lot more of the vertical podcast content. Not that we weren't doing it before, we were doing vertical podcast content, but again, the formula hadn't really been fully dialed yet, and we were doing IGTV. We were doing like 2.5-minute clips sometimes on IGTV for the Wheels to Walking podcast. Mm-hmm. And then once we kind of figured out, okay, this is the model, and we really just started ripping with the 4Media podcast, and eventually that became the Bad Marketing podcast. And yeah, we did great numbers there, had a lot of amazing guests, including yourself. And I learned a lot there in managing a team of how all that back end works, but also keeping in mind that, the post-production and the shorts and all that is like, you know, just as important as the actual, you know, podcast itself.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It's the message of what's coming out of the podcast. But let's dive into that, because that's probably the thing that people are asking you the most about, which is the 4Media / Bad Marketing really departure. So let's kind of go over what happened at 4Media in your journey of just growth and what you've learned and things like that. Also, maybe some of the things behind the scenes that people may not know about when putting on big content shows and productions like you guys have with events and stuff. Very interested to see, kind of your perspective through that journey.
Yeah, so there was all different areas of content that I was dealing with. So on one hand, I was dealing with the organic side of growing the 4Media brand as a whole. And then there was making content for our clients, mainly e-commerce clients, selling direct-to-consumer products. And then the occasional event stuff, agency founders and things like that. So got to kind of spread the gamut. But in the beginning, it was really just Eddie Maloof. We'd known each other for maybe like 6 or 7 years at that point. We worked together at Lifetime Fitness, and he kind of just cast the vision of what we could do with this agency. He was pivoting it was like November 2020, pivoting to e-com. We were still in the middle of all the COVID stuff. So it was like, okay, e-com's starting to really blow up. And so I was still pretty new in that world, to be honest, but I'd been in the online and digital marketing space for a little while, and obviously, you know, marketing my own podcast and marketing the Wheels to Walking YouTube channel and stuff like that. I understood the game completely, but from a paid side, that was kind of new. I hadn't really done a ton of, okay, we've got this piece of content, now let's throw, you know, thousands of dollars, sometimes, you know, $1 million at just getting eyeballs on this content and, you know, hoping that it converts. And that was, you know, very pivotal moment. And also even that world has changed. Like when I first started, like UGC, this idea of UGC was still very new. Like it definitely isn't like kind of where it evolved to. We just learned from experience, man. Like we just did everything. I was in grind mode during those beginnings, especially just really head down, lots of late nights, lots of, you know, just problem solving, man. When you're building something like that, you're just constantly having to deal with scaling issues. And, you know, it's not easy, but it's manageable to run a team of, you know, 3 or 4 people. But once you get kind of past that point, it's like, okay, now I've got to, you know, I'm stepping out of the, you know, holding a camera as much and actually editing, and now I'm kind of managing a creative team, which I think it's a blessing and a curse in some ways, because it's like on some hands, like I've got a lot of people that are like wanting to work with me, but they want to work with me in the sense that they want me to make content for them, and not that I'm not down to do that right now, for the right price. Like I'm down to work with people on, custom projects and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, am I more effective leading a creative team or helping lead your creative team? Or am I more effective as like that person behind the camera or that person in the editing bay? And what I've kind of realized is the finishing touches of an edit are, I think, where I like shine the most. I think like I don't need to be the guy that like assembles it all together. And I think this is kind of the idea of like a junior editor and like a senior editor kind of thing. Again, I'm not really from the filmmaking background, so it's funny because some things you kind of back your way into. And like from the other side of things, they're like front loading all the technical stuff, but then they fall short on maybe just like the whole point of it all.
Yeah.
Like I'm coming at it from, hey, I want to achieve this goal. What do I need to do to like actually get there? And again, that's kind of from the pain side. It's like, hey, I need to move product and I'm about to put a bunch of money behind whatever this ad is. I don't, some brands there's a spectrum of, how much do I care about what this actually looks like and follows my brand guidelines, and how well is this going to convert? And there's a spectrum there. Yeah. And I actually, on my onboarding calls with clients, I started asking them that, like, hey, if you had to kind of rate yourself on a scale of like, whatever we make, maybe it's converting at an insane rate, but it's not really following your brand, and maybe it's a little corny or whatever, and maybe it's not exactly what you want, but it's converting amazing, or something that follows your brand guidelines to a T, looks beautiful, is incredible, but maybe isn't really performing on the paid side. You're kind of throwing money at Facebook for no reason. There a lot of people would say, well, it's somewhere in the middle, but it kind of gets them to think. They're like, okay, is the conversion rate the ultimate metric, or is there some aspect of like brand building that I need to give a fuck about?
What's crazy about that? People will still choose the latter of what you said. I'm the former. I'm like, has to just have these colors, these elements, but make it convert. Because I come from the media buying side. Hey, we're trying to make money here, make profit so we can go do whatever. Not just the aesthetic and the brand. And there is a balance of, and that's direct response marketing versus brand. Yeah, and I remember working with some e-com brands because For Media and one of my prior agencies were kind of the same thing. Yeah, we just didn't have an Andrew Deitsch where it understood and loved content and was building out teams for it. So we ended up actually exiting the e-commerce space overall with the D2C kind of distribution side because you needed more UGC and content, et cetera. We did UGC, but not full production like what you guys did. But I remember kind of going down those routes, and some people were like, no, it has to be this type of mock-up with this color, this brand. It has to be angled at this way. I'm like, you're trying to move makeup. Every makeup ad looks like that. So you have to have some sort of difference, and it's not going to be your tan. It's not going to be your black. It's not going to be whatever. There has to be some sort of other element. And so I think it's a really good point, but it's all funny to see brand founders think of what ads do.
Because I think some brands, I've seen this kind of as like a meme recently of like, there's kind of like a meme of like, my hands look like this, so her hands can look like this kind of thing like that. It's like, like Russ guy with like some rugged hands. But there's like a variation of it that I've seen recently that's like me building my, empire so that my wife can have a side business that loses $10,000 a month in losses. You know what I mean? Like, it's more of a passion project for some people that they have this like this idea in their head that's more romantic about running a brand than it is actually like building a business that's actually making a lot of money and as profitable as it can be.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said on both sides. I think like typically the people that are more attached to the brand side, they are more emotional towards like what they're building. And maybe it is kind of like that thing that they have just wanted for a very long time to build. But the problem is they're not willing to make the sacrifices in the beginning on like quality and things like that. Because, to your point earlier, you said, first impressions are everything and things like that. And it's like, am I building this thing so that all my social media followers can respect me and that I look on paper like I'm building this really cool brand and product that everyone is like pumped to, talk about and like say, oh, I'm friends with Robert. He owns this company and blah, blah, blah. And like cloud chasing, or is it like actually from the fundamentals building the business? I think AG1 is a perfect example of that. I don't know if you've ever seen
of course I see there.
OG Athletic Greens ads. Bro, they are dog shit. Their branding now is so clean.
It's so clean, yeah.
It's so amazing. Their content is amazing. I send their content specifically to my team all the time of like, I love this idea. I love this hook. I love this angle. because they are one of the brands that has done a really great job at combining high-end experiential like visuals with performance-driven ads that actually make me want to purchase what they're selling. And if you look at their OG landing pages and OG funnels and things like that, it is not pretty. It is very corny. It's very cartoonish, very a million things on the label, you know, like AG1, it has blank, 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 blank. And now what is AG1? Just AG1, that's it. Yeah. Bottle. And so like they've had a huge evolution, but people don't look back at what that was and say, oh, maybe there's a season of my business that needs to kind of look back at that. And you know, even if you are trying, I'm sure that they were trying, you know, it wasn't like they weren't trying to make it look cool, but they just weren't coming at it from that super high-end glossy feel in the beginning.
And I think there's two sides to that that just reminded me of. One being that if you're in the startup phases of the brand, the energy that you use has to be focused on the things that are driving the revenue or pushing the logistics forward in e-commerce. It has to be channeled over to that, to the logo schmogo, right? Like, who cares what it looks like? But then when you get to a level where, hey, there's revenue, it's actually cash flowing, we're able to pay for our team, number one, able to pay for the product, number two, we have good supply chain, we got good logistics, we got good costs, great. Now we can care about the projects that don't produce a direct ROI, but do impact all org structure. And I tell my team all the time, and one of the core values I have is show me, don't tell me. The thing that you're working on is to produce the result, not just because it looks cool or it's marginal work that doesn't provide an ROI, doesn't provide any new savings to the company. It's just to do the work. Well, it's a waste of time. And so, especially in e-commerce, you have to go through that phase of growing up just like any other kid has to go through a grow up phase before they get adolescence. And there's a book called 22 Laws or 22 Rules of Immutable, or 22 Immutable Rules. Man, 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. There we go. And it talks about how the brand as it is expands different product lines and the brand hits that stage where it's glossy or whatever, then starts introducing product lines that aren't the core thing. They actually lose respect on the brand because they're not tied to the roots anymore. It's just super wide and doesn't actually have any power.
Yeah, and I actually think that that's where like starting different brands, like having a complete sub brand, like I think a brand that's really good at this in the jewelry niche is there's a conglomerate of, I don't know which is the parent company at this point, but there's a company called Vitali that makes kind of more like Gen Z stainless steel, cheaper jewelry that's trendier. And then they have another company called Clocks and Colors that makes like silver jewelry, a little bit different. The Vitali brand is a little more like I said, kind of Gen Z, maybe like TikTokery vibes. And then Clocks and Colors is a little more like biker dude, maybe some pirate aesthetics in there, a little more rugged, a little more rustic. Yeah. And it appeals to like two different genres. And then they have a couple of other brands under their umbrella as well, but those are the two that I kind of like look at us because I'm like, okay, if Clocks and Colors tried to go this direction, I think it would have failed. And I think if Vitali would have gone this direction, it would have failed. But they're the same company, but completely two brands, and the customers don't know the difference. I only know because I'm kind of nerdy and I like look into this type of stuff. Yeah. And I'm kind of stuck in between the two genres as well. Like I kind of like both of the brands. Yeah. But it's funny because like when people are they're trying to get too polished too early, I think. And I think that's actually where Eddie brought me in at a perfect time because when we were starting with 4Media, if you look at the early days of 4Media, there was no office. Like Eddie was working in his parents' basement. His logo was something that he made on Canva in 2 seconds. Not 2 seconds, but you know what I mean. Or he probably hired somebody to make it in Fiverr or whatever, very cheap. Like as far as the content, it was, all phones, pretty much a little bit of cameras and stuff, but nothing too crazy. And I think once he had built the cash flowing vehicle, he knew that he had a business here. There was room to pay people. There's room to have an office. There's room to invest in all these things. That's when he kind of brought me in. And I remember laughing at some of this stuff, like, oh my God, this is so funny because this brand is just like kind of corny, but in a way it was like, I also respected it because it was like, I mean, dude, you don't need to have the craziest branding and all this stuff when you're just working. I mean, at the time we were doing local business, mainly working with like, auto niche, like doing like window tinting, wheel repair, stuff like that, getting leads for those types of shops. And so it's like, dude, those guys don't give a fuck. Like they don't care if our, content is like insane or whatever. But, I think especially once we started offering content as a service, it was kind of like, okay, if you're selling content as a service and your content for your own brand is not high end or experiential or make you feel any, emotion, it's like, how am I going to have any faith that you're going to be able to do that for my brand when you know nothing about it coming into it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the importance kind of lies there. And to go back to the ROI thing, it is very hard to measure the ROI of content. Like I think there's this Gary Vee quote that I think about often where he says, all right, well, tell me the ROI of your mother. Like you can't tell me the calculable ROI of your mom, but you know that your mom has insane, infinite ROI. And it's kind of the same thing with content. It's like, it's very hard to get down to the nitty gritty and do reporting and, all these things to like figure out exactly how much revenue is generated from content. You can on ads in a direct links in a supermarket, but this podcast, for example, how are we tracking how much money this is bringing you or me? It's not really possible, but the way I like to look at a content is it's the oil that makes the machine go. Like when you think about a car, you don't really think about the oil that often. You're more thinking about gas. I think especially in paid, the gas kind of like spend. But it's like if you keep spending into an engine that has no oil in it, eventually it's just going to grind to a halt and eventually break the whole thing. Yeah. And so it's like content is the oil that makes that makes your business smoother. And like, for example, people used to spend so much time on VSLs, not that they don't work or anything like that, but it's like you could also have a killer 30-minute YouTube video that gets just as many views and just as many leads, and you got them for free because they're on your YouTube channel where you've built an audience, a captive audience where they're down to watch a 30-minute video and then at the end maybe buy something, and
Yeah, I know, I agree, especially it's like long game, short game. And then also to your point about advertising, what's the ROI on content? Would you rather go to market with your Instagram looking a certain way or not? And that's just a simplistic way that I even got started into it with a buddy of mine that was doing branding, because I was like branding, schmanding, whatever. Like, I don't really care because I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars per month in advertising and doing this route. And he's like, no, but your content looks like you're still a high school kid. But you're not. You're like 3 years removed. You got all this other stuff going on. So let's update it. And when I went through that update, the business completely boomed because the front end content was backing the claims that I was making. Even if the claims were true, even if the claims weren't true, whatever, the brand at least made the perception of that they were true. And obviously I'm an ethical guy, but some people do it the other route. But especially for e-com, dude, everything is commoditized in e-com. The makeup is commoditized. Different products are just the same supplier, like you said, with the watches, but a different brand. And so investing into the brand is what will make the moat, not just the product.
Totally. And I also think with content, you mentioned it earlier, it's your first impression. It's your perception in the world. I mean, perception, you can have a debate of like perception is reality, but in the grand scheme of marketing and, business, it's like you have a perception. You can't control whether or not or people perceive you a certain way. Yeah. And you do have control over certain elements of how they're going to perceive you, especially from a first impression type of standpoint. Yeah. And I think a lot of it just goes back to self-awareness and empathy of like, okay, if I was a brand new person or if I was my target customer, how would I want to be talked to? How would I want to be marketed to? How would I want to be sold to? And, it's like the best form of selling, marketing and all that is when people don't realize that they're being sold at all. It's like I've heard this thing between like, what's the difference between marketing and propaganda? It's like they're the same, but propaganda is funded by like a nation state or politics or something like that. They're the exact same thing. And there's another quote that's like, oh man, there's like an American spy to a Russian spy talking to each other, and the American spy says like to the Russian guy, man, your propaganda is so good, I almost believe it. And he goes, your propaganda is so good that you do. And it's like, holy shit. Yeah. Like that's a big one. Cause it's kind of like marketing. When you can spot it as marketing, you kind of go, oh, that's really good marketing. And the best marketing is when you don't even realize that you're being marketed to at all. And you are just hook, line, and sinker. And sometimes, and that's not, like you said, if you're an ethical person and you're really delivering an amazing product, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Like there's nothing wrong with, making something seem amazing and then delivering an amazing product.
Yeah. Yeah. Or service. And when you got to the political side, Russia and America, I remember, I haven't really said this a lot publicly, but I was asked to do some American political campaigns, like for different jurisdictions and stuff. And when I got to that level, I was like, oh, whoa, like this is a different game. I had some glances into some presidential campaigns prior. But when I was actually offered, I was like, this is interesting. And I didn't take it, not because I didn't care about doing the campaigns or any of that kind of stuff, but I had to take a step back and I was just like, okay, what is it that I'm really doing? And, that's kind of where I had a little stop a little bit with the paid ads on marketing myself, because I entered a whole different realm that I wasn't aware that I could enter, which is cool. So I was like, okay, great. So then when you're talking about like great marketing is identifiable, amazing marketing isn't, you have this the way that I perceive it, especially with e-com brands, right? Like there's an entity in which that has messaging that needs to get out to make a market believe something about your product. So it's the same kind of tactics about an identifier or a personal brand, I should say, someone that they can identify with, a political candidate, a nation state's beliefs, etc. And I got really fascinated with looking back as to, okay, my mom, she smokes cigarettes, or she smoked cigarettes growing up. Why? What habit caused her to do that? Well, if we go back to the women's era, that era in the 60s and 70s, it was looked at as a sexy thing to do, to smoke cigarettes, and that was propagated by those companies. 60, 70 years later, now we know the effects of smoking and the cigarettes and what it does to the lungs, et cetera. But that decision that was made that then became a LTV cash flowing machine that e-com looks at, but in the old traditional routes, was from propaganda by attaching it to some sort of ideology.
And how do you track the ROI of one of these old movie stars smoking a cigarette in a movie? You can't track that, but inherently you associate being cool with smoking a cigarette. Like, yeah. And I mean, even I'll admit it, smoking a cigarette looks fucking cool from time to time. But it's like when you actually look at it, but you're right, it's kind of like the positioning of it. Why does it look cool? Oh, because it kind of exudes this like bad boy thing. It looks cool to breathe the smoke out, whatever. Yeah. And it's like, ultimately when you really boil it back down, you could make the same argument for alcohol too. It's like, dude, why would I want to drink a bunch of poison and like feel shitty the next day and blah, blah, blah. You can kind of do the anti-marketing towards a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's all sales arguments, belief systems. And then that's where, if we look at all products that are out there, they are just man-made. The belief systems, typically man-made. And there was a really cool quote in one of my favorite new series that is kind of coming out, Dune. Have you seen that movie?
I saw the new one.
Man, it is some of the coolest production, the coolest script writing. I'm obsessed with it. In fact, actually the other night, I was watching the movie and my girl, she was watching it too, but she kept falling asleep like halfway through the movie. So we're like, all right, let's just keep watching it. Like, let's just get through this whole movie. And I was obsessed with it. But long story short, there's some quotes in there that point out ideologies, belief systems, and propaganda. One of which being, if you promise them a Messiah, they will do nothing and wait for him. And I was thinking on a political level, like if you promise some sort of outcome and you propagate towards that Messiah, then they're not going to do anything. They're not going to think that they have any power to control their destiny. And I was really thinking of that in regards to marketing. Then obviously I went down a whole religious thing. Then I went down on a government thing. And I was just like,
Bitcoin rabbit hole.
Yeah. I was just like, oh my gosh, like that is such an inception type of belief that you have to evaluate it when you hear things like that across all of the beliefs that you have to see if it's propaganda or if it's actually true.
Dude, because when you watch a movie like that, it's so like, man, they did such an incredible job of world building in that universe where you're looking at it from a completely outside perspective. And there's definitely elements where, I mean, there's still humanoids, like all that kind of stuff. But like, there's definitely elements where you can have empathy for characters for, situations that are reflected in real world scenarios or, even just the kind of the premise of the whole thing. It's kind of like a Fern Gully or Avatar sort of story in certain ways where it's like they're coming to steal the spice and blah, 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 things like that. And there's so many real world parallels that you can make. But when you're so far removed, you can make those observations and be like, oh, well, that's obvious. Like, why aren't they doing this? But then you put yourself in that type of situation. And you're like, well, that's not that different than this situation. And I feel a little bit differently about that because of where I am politically or where I live or, my preconceived notions. And I think movies like that really help to, shift the overall consciousness of all of us, to help us to not, I think it's like, you should try to make yourself brainwash proof by just observing and absorbing as many opinions and, perspectives as you can, because it's not that any perspective is right or wrong. It's just a matter of how that they've gone their way. And I think that like some people are afraid to listen to other opinions and perspectives. They're like, oh, I'm reading this book by this author. And they're like, oh, well, I've heard that guy is very blah, blah, blah. And he perpetuates these stereotypes. It's like, well, why can I not read it and still have my own opinion? Just because I'm reading this book doesn't mean I'm automatically going to prescribe myself to his beliefs and thought processes. I should be a resilient human where I am, anti-fragile in my beliefs, that I'm not so easily persuaded by just reading something and then immediately adopting it as my whole personality and stuff.
Yeah, it's controlling of the mind. It's you being in control of your mind, but then who really owns it? There was a podcast, or it was actually a talk show from back in the day, but Bob Lazar, if you've been getting into the alien stuff, said that there was a classified document on religion at Area 51 at the time that he was there. It's about 1,000 pages. It's like, why would there be a classified document on religion? Then you have to go down, the religious rabbit hole of what beliefs and what story arcs are being told, and that's just on the religious side. But you can look at it for aliens itself. You can look at it for all these other things, and the mind being so valuable and the mind being trained a certain way can result in a completely different outcome for the entire world, for your reality, for your family, your future family's reality. It's all coming from here.
Totally, man. And I mean, to go down this kind of like deep rabbit hole bit, like I think one of the areas where as a society, like it's hard to imagine these like really big shifts because they feel so big. But I mean, people underestimate what can happen in 1 or 2 years, but or they overestimate what can happen in a couple of years, but they underestimate what can happen in 5, what can happen in 10. And like for example, you look outside, you've got all these cars that are driving around, people driving cars, and they're stopping at stoplights. Ever think about what type of system runs the stoplights? Like without stoplights, it's already chaos down there. Think about how even more chaotic it would be without stoplights. But we just made those up, and those are just part of society now. And and it's funny, like you're at a crosswalk, and you see the walking side and the hand side. There's some people that are like, I'm not gonna let a fucking sign tell me what to do. I'll walk when I want to walk. But like most people kind of just like, no, you walk when there's a walk sign. Like that's it. Like we just agree societally to this new norm. And it's very, and you can look at COVID and things like that of like how people immediately kind of created a new norm very quickly. And I think in instances like a Bitcoin type of situation where it's like it's hard for people to imagine us like going down something like that. But it's like and you look at Peter Schiff and people like that are like super anti Bitcoin because there's such, I think he has ulterior motives with his gold company and stuff, but
sure.
He looks at it as like, it's just made up. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. And it's like, well, there's so many things in our lives that are just made up, that are a collective consciousness type of thing that we all agree upon. Even the US dollar, it's not backed by anything besides, the US government at this point. But like, there's so many things in life that where you can kind of look at and evaluate. It's like, is this a real thing, or did someone just make this up? And maybe they weren't even much smarter than you or me, but they just had the balls to just say that they were going to do this thing. Yeah. I think the same thing goes with starting a brand. Same thing goes with starting a podcast. Like, okay, what's stopping you from having a podcast? Like, just literally you saying, I now have a podcast and start it. Like I think about like presidents, like, I think it was JFK that did FDR that did the fireside chats. I think FDR did the fireside chats where like you go on the radio and just talk to the American people. Like, why don't we have that? You know what I mean? Like, I think of someone like a Joe Rogan, like, I feel like I've spent more time with him than my own freaking dad. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Just based on how many hours I've listened to him in conversations. And that's not saying that I haven't spent a lot of time with my dad. It's almost more of a testament to just how many hours of podcasting that Joe has done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the effect that he's had on the world. But I think like in general, digital messaging and putting yourself out there, content is like the language of the internet in a lot of ways. And so it's like actively kind of choosing not to learn a little bit of editing or take content seriously or, these type of things, you're actively kind of choosing to still live. Like you were saying, I look like a high schooler, even though I actually am, really successful and I've done all these things, I have all these accolades, but because I didn't take my content seriously, my perception from the front end is, is one level, but just being a little more content literate and, if you're really so stubborn that you're like, I just don't get this stuff, I can't get this stuff. I mean, even you said it, you're like, I don't really like the content stuff, but I understood at a certain point it was necessary to take myself to the next level. And I think that's a lot of people.
Yeah, like I remember when I first changed the perception from, hey, it's content to, no, it's your brand and what are people going to be knowing you for and how are they going to match those accolades? That's when I started to put investment into it because I had seen, at least my perception and my experience was I worked at an agency, saw the revenue coming in and all that kind of stuff, and then just built it for myself. There's power behind media. But at the same time, I've learned over the past couple of years, I'm not competing against Andrew. I'm not competing against Grant Cardone. I'm not competing against Tony Robbins. I'm not competing against any of those guys. I'm competing against Kim Kardashian. I'm competing against Kanye. I'm competing against Trump. I'm competing against the people that have the attention because the attention is scarce. You've generated billions of views online through paid and also through organic. So you're competing with the highest levels of content production, the highest levels of messaging, and also the highest levels of entertainment. So it's a blend between all 3-4 of those things while also providing value. And sure, it could be the good looks that helps attribute some of that. The good looking set attributes to some of that. The conversation or the style that I'm wearing, whatever, all that attributes to that end prospect or that end customer that you're trying to get through paid ads or even attract through organic content.
Yeah, and I also think there's something to be said. I haven't really heard many people talk about this, but like the perception of what you're watching. Okay, so let's say I'm at the office. I work at in an office or whatever, and I've got a podcast playing on the side, and I'm playing some well-known podcast. I might have a cool interaction because someone maybe like comes up to me like, "Oh, you watch that podcast, dude? Oh yeah, that's a good one." Blah blah blah, stuff like that. But if I'm watching some random dude in his bedroom that looks like he just woke up and whatever, and I'm like almost kind of embarrassed that I'm watching this content, taking advice from this guy. It's kind of like. I think of like Alex Becker, like it's like sometimes kind of hard to send people videos of his because it's like you can't because it's like immediately starting off just being the most degenerate, like funny shit that he can think of to say. But he does that, I think, on purpose because he's also like playing a character a bit and stuff. But anyways, to go back to my point, it's like it's easy to consume Kanye, Kim Kardashian, whatever, all these big well-known people because it's almost kind of like there's already an army of other people that are doing the same thing. So you don't have to worry about like looking cool or like whatever. And I'm not saying that people listen to podcasts to look cool, but for example, it's like, do you want to be proud of the stuff that you listen to and the stuff that you watch? Like if my favorite musician didn't give a fuck how his music sounded and he was just putting out, he was super talented, but he wasn't actually like putting in the time to make it like a good listening experience for me, or he was doing, whatever the case might be, just not thinking of me, I'm probably less likely to like, feel excited to like engage with that content in a different way. And so I think the key there is, like you said, it's competing against all these other things, but it's figuring out how you can like, for me, it's like, okay, I want to have people that listen to my show and stuff like that are either like similar to me, think about a lot of the same things as me, or a younger version of me that like wants to kind of like learn and is kind of seeking some answers that maybe I've like found already. And so I think you're kind of competing against them in different ways, but maybe that person is already kind of starting to delve into other territories and things like that. But you're totally right. Like at the end of the day, there's a reason why we say you pay attention. Pay. Like the word pay is a very money transactional word. And when you're paying attention, you're giving up a moment and, whatever you want to measure attention in, maybe energy over, time. Like, because when you're giving something attention, you're giving it your focus, you're giving it your energy, you're giving it your time. And you can kind of be half paying attention, but again, half paying attention. You're giving half of your attention to something and half you're paying to something else. And so attention really is a very scarce resource because it's ultimately tied directly to time, and time is one of the biggest, scarce resources in the world. And actually, my friend Aaron told me this last night. He said, in life, you either you have time and money, and you spend more of what you have, or you spend what you have more of. So if you have more money, you're down to just you're down to blow it. Versus if you have no money but you have a lot of time, you need to spend that working on decreasing that delta.
It's a spectrum, like you just said, of where's the balance between that. And something that's very interesting that I've had to learn, and especially when you start working with personal brands, you see the evolution happen when more money and more views and attention comes in. So I always viewed it from agency to that in my early journey. Now I have the companies and they're running, they're growing, etc. And I go, okay, like, what is my second worth? What is 10 seconds worth? What could I compound in my brain computing power that will compound into XYZ decisions for X companies, the portfolio, the fund, whatever.
And that only I can do.
That only I can do. And it's not a haughty thing. Haughty eyes in the Bible means like to just look down on people that don't have as much of whatever. It's not that at all. And I used to think that people were looking down on people.
Yeah, like I can't afford to mow my own lawn.
Yeah, but it's not that at all. Or even if you go to a mentor, right? Like if you go to a mastermind and they say something that is almost, I don't want to say degrading because they don't mean it that way. It's just there's a translation barrier between what they're talking about and where you're at, or maybe what you're trying to perceive or trying to ask the question that you think is going to pop you through. Or sometimes you just need to listen because you may need to go back down a ladder and then go up a different one that gets you to that point. And I always looked at it. I was like, okay, so why do they believe what they believe? What mechanisms of energy are underneath them that are causing them to think that way? And when I shifted my mindset or my thinking and my questioning to that, when you see money starting to come in, it's a current. It's a river. So imagine if you're just like looking at a river, it flowing, and you want to either control the river, you want to build scaffolding around it, you start to expand contingent on that current moving. And that's how empires are built. That's how literal cities and civilizations are built when you apply that same thinking from business over to another realm, which is world building, right? And so when people get that lift, when I've gotten that lift, I was like, okay, so my marginal input of time actually impacts XYZ civilization or XYZ group that could be compounded in families, et cetera, because of that. Now, yes, I will still exert, still do my grind, still do that kind of stuff, but the energy has to be channeled in such a way that has that compounding effect to create opportunity, et cetera. And when you have that visibility, one of the mediums that does give the best ROI is content. Yeah. So especially if you're successful, taking those years to go build the credibility, build the resume, build the stack of what you do, it's even more important to do content.
Totally.
Because that content can go create new streams somewhere else, not just for you, but for other people. And, you've done that across billions of views, man. Have you ever stopped and think of like, okay, what streams, beliefs, what impact have I made? Because I remember even just with one of the brands I scaled it to a couple $1 million per year from, 1 million to like 7 million. It was skincare. But that's changing the perception of someone's face, which means their image of themselves, which means they probably got better dates or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, have you ever thought of the impact made behind the conversion or the views that you've actually gotten?
Yeah, definitely. I've thought about that quite a bit, especially being in the agency space working with so many brands. Like, I'd be lying if I said that there was clients that I had favorites. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of hard to not care about what you're doing, And so it's like, you can kind of tell when there was some, and I will say, like, it was rare that I had clients where I felt like they were, scamming people or, like not having an authentic product or, just kind of having a shitty product. There wasn't much of that at all at 4Media because, there's things in place to try to stop that as much as we can in the sales process and things like that. It's like we're turning away 99% of the leads we're getting, probably more than that. It was actually crazy. We did one of those like Spotify rap things. And that actually is a crazy thing to look at when you look at all the data of the numbers of just how big of an impact we're making. I mean, dude, if you look at individual, like our email team sending out how many emails they actually sent in the year, it was over 1 billion. Because some of these email lists are millions big and they're sending emails many times a week. It's fucking crazy. And so when you really break it down, it's like, holy shit, like billions of eyeballs, you know, of billions of emails, you know, let alone how many ads did we serve? How many individual pieces of content do we make? Things like that. And so, yeah, definitely. I think about it all the time. You know, and I think about it in my own, content. Like, okay, am I just trying to go viral? Like, I've gotten views. It's fun. Like, it's fun to go viral. It's fun to, you know, be well known and have a video. But I mean, all of going viral really amounts to is a bunch of your friends going, hey, I see you here. Like, oh, I'm crazy. You know, this blew up, or maybe getting recognized every once in a while, things like that. But
I've had that happen. It's a little weird.
It's weird.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've realized, like, I don't really want to go viral. I want to build a really good audience that I resonate with. I want to have people that like follow me and like respect me. And I meet them on the street and I'm like, that person could probably be one of my homies. You know what I mean? Or like, I could see myself like being friends with that person. That would be my kind of like goal of like who I'm building in my audience, or at least having someone that, you know, isn't like fanboying over, you know, cause it's just kind of weird. Like, I want someone that's like, oh my God, Robert, I watch you every day. You know, like that's fucking weird.
I had that happen one time. It was actually the early phases of my career. Oh my God. I went to an event. I think it was the 10X Growth Con. And back in the day, Facebook groups used to be like popping, right? Like, because the distribution was a little bit different. Totally. And I was on this ClickFunnels mission of just like, hey, I have a 17 ROAS. Here's how I'm doing it. Like, I would just, kind of like case study / perspective.
Totally. And you get so many leads because you're just dropping value in the threads, and, you know, starting a little bit of a conversation about like what's working for you. And you immediately have people that know who you are.
Yeah. And it wasn't like a bait and switchy way. It was just genuine kind of stuff. Right. And so I remember
kind of like what people do on LinkedIn these days.
Yeah. Yeah. LinkedIn still trips me out. It's basically Facebook groups, 2018. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so So I did this, and I remember checking into the hotel. I forget what hotel it was in Vegas, checking in for the 10X Growth Con, and I was just checking in, dude. I got like a backpack. I'm like just wearing a t-shirt, nothing crazy. This kid runs up to me, like sprints. It's like, Robert. And I have my partners for my old business at the time behind me in the line. So I'm at the kiosk thing, check-in table, and then they're here. They see this kid run up, and they're like, Robert, look out. I was like looking left and right. I was like, what the hell's going on? And this kid is just like, Robert, I've seen you in the Facebook groups. Oh my God, it's you, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, okay, hi. And like, he just kept going on and on and on and on. He's like, can we get a picture? Blah, blah, blah. What are you here for? Like, just over the top fanboy. And I was just like, man, that was one. And that was not even on like a, sexual tension basis. Imagine what rock stars feel like when 95 girls or 95% of their fan base are girls, like Justin Bieber or whatever, wanting to throwing themselves at you, like the rock star life or the fame life. I was like, whoa, this is weird. I haven't had any crazy altercations like that or like crazy scenarios like that, but I remember the first one, because I think you just get used to it and get used to it, but I was like, whoa, this is weird.
Yeah, dude, it is weird. And I think like we don't give enough credit to like celebrities and people that have to deal with that every day.
Yeah.
I think we kind of look at it as like, oh, well, this is what you asked for. This is what you did it all for, huh? Like, you get what you deserve. Oh, poor you. You're so rich and you're famous. Like, I think that there's a lot of sentiment of that, but it's also like, one, this person is another human being, and what you know about them is only a sliver of what they've, given to the world. Granted, if you listen to someone on a podcast for long enough, you probably know them like decently well, which is kind of weird, and I've had it happen where a couple of times people are like, yo, dude, I love your podcast. I think I've listened to like all of them. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy because you feel like you know me, but I don't know you at all. Yeah. That's a weird one, and that's kind of the price of like putting yourself out there and things like that. And I've also toyed with the idea of like a faceless kind of like YouTube channel feels like super, it's kind of trendy right now of like, oh, do these like faceless YouTube channels, like what's the point of being famous kind of thing. And I kind of, there's part of me that kind of wants to do that, but there's also part of me that it's totally not my style. Like I'm a pretty like open person. I like being on camera. I think I'm good on camera, things like that. So it's like, doesn't really fit my vibe to just be kind of this like faceless thing.
Yeah.
Especially once you start going into like crypto and stuff like that, like putting your identity out there, getting doxxed, like having it be another attack vector, things like that. It's like, it can be kind of scary, you know, to put yourself out there and things like that. And I can get why people wouldn't, but I think the world is starting to understand that aspect a little bit, because not everyone, but a lot of people have been able to kind of have their 5 seconds of fame with TikTok and things like that, where they realize, like, I mean, it's how many, you know, people do you know that have gone like one video that goes like really viral and then the rest of their like page is like nothing? They posted some random video.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. And the crazy part that I like to see is what it means to them. Because I don't watch social media. Like, I don't have a TikTok on my phone, and it's not a whole government thing. It's just like, I don't watch these things. Again, attention, back to like, what's the ROI of the attention?
Yeah, you think it might be kind of a haughty thing, but it's actually just like, no, I'm choosing actively to spend my time and pay attention to others.
Well, dude, the channeling of my energy, man, it's nothing's on like the ticker talker. That's what I call it. Like, nothing's on that. I feel like a grandpa. Ticker talker. I don't take on sporadic phone calls. All my phone's on Do Not Disturb, Robo Killer, like everything's there. Slack messages, I only get pinged if I am actually tagged in the thing. Like, I've turned off all the notifications. No notifications from anything, because that's the currency. And when your time becomes valuable enough, and we were even talking about it prior about like drinking or any, you know, vices and stuff, those becoming more expensive than the things that you're actually, you know, or than they cost, because of the thing that is preventing you from doing. And you have a lot of responsibility when you get to a certain point in business. But to your point about, you know, the fanboying and just the media and it not having their identity on it, I think it's also because people are scared of those things, because their reference is paparazzi. Their reference is Kim K, Justin Bieber. And then the crypto side, I mean, we can talk about that a little bit, but I think that's just because of government regulation on like not having clarity, I should say, on what they're going to do for influencers and all that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, that's the barrier that they need to cross.
And I think that if you haven't, like, if you think that we should be allowed to just, you know, facial track everyone everywhere, and everyone should be able to just follow you around and take pictures of you all the time, because that's basically, I mean, paparazzi is just like professional stalking. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally just like showing you up for free. Yeah. And, yeah, some people do it for free. And the thing is like, if we can't, as a society, go, hey, maybe this is kind of just a bad thing, and your house should be your sanctuary where you should be able to go and just not worry about people fucking following you around and knowing your whereabouts and taking pictures of you and things like that. And it's like, and if you haven't gone down the rabbit hole of thought yourself of why that could potentially become a bad thing, you probably just haven't really thought too hard about this type of thing. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think, especially, you know, I mentioned the like facial recognition type of stuff, and it's like, dude, you know, this stuff could get scary pretty quick. And I think it's already like kind of getting scary. And it's like, people, we need to be aware of like, how we're letting our guards down and letting, like, you know, like, okay, yeah, paparazzi's fine, whatever, they're just celebrities, it doesn't affect me, but it doesn't affect you until it does, you know what I mean? And like, not saying that surveillance cameras and stuff are the same as like paparazzi, but they kind of go hand in hand in a little bit of ways, because it's like, if you can stalk someone with a person with a camera, it's like, if you have enough cameras around a city, you can stalk someone walking around a city, and who's in control of that shit?
It's precedent. Yeah. So even if it's, you know, not directly affecting you now, like, I'm not being chased down by camera guys in the streets, maybe in the studio, but not in the streets. I mean, I don't know. Actually, in Miami, they do the freaking camera thing. Like, hey, the man on the street thing. Miami's a great place for that. I've gotten hit up so many times, and I've only done it for people that are like friends of mine, you know, but like, dude, it is so ridiculous. Like, I think it's funny, because also think about like, what made you believe that is the thing that you should be spending your time on? It's the platform, media, your energy is going in. It's weird, right? It's
very weird. It's a good way to get eyeballs on whatever you're doing, and it's a good way to just practice doing stuff. But I don't think anyone's making it, quote unquote, as one of these street interviewers. Like, what's your goal, dude? What's your end goal?
It's the views, man, and that's the scary part. It actually is Black Mirror kind of stuff. But that's you can go down a big rabbit hole associated there, but that's the precedent that's being set with how to make it in content or make it in the short form kind of world. And it changes perspective. It changes your reality. Because when we were talking about, you know, when you've gotten billions of views, how do you feel?
Yeah.
the brand is the filter between your distribution and all the impact that's made. So you don't get that feedback loop. Just like if someone's watching 8 hours of your podcast or whatever, they know you, but you don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
You know their attributes, and you know those things, so you know enough about the characteristics. But it's like that human element is just like popped out.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's to go back to that feeling. It's like I know how to get views, and if I really wanted to just make a bunch of sensational content that got millions and millions of views, I could go out and start doing that. I'd probably do street interviews and shit like that. Like it's very easy to go viral when you can find something sensational, something weird, something whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's like you got to really think about what's worth it to spend your time and what the end goal of all of it is. Like, okay, if your end goal is to run a, production company one day or do something like that, like just getting your feet wet in any kind of content's probably good. But like, if you're wanting to grow a business or a personal brand or, whatever type of things, like you should probably be a little more strategic on how you're going to spend your time, what you're going to, spend time doing, making content. And I even see this happening in general with the types of content being made. I think like I tend to watch a lot of YouTube while I'm doing other things. Like I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm doing so the video part of it, just like a podcast, is like less relevant than the actual information. And I'm starting to see that more of a trend on YouTube. Yeah. And I'm realizing that if the information is important enough, people will watch it and consume it regardless of if there's something to keep your attention every 2 seconds. And I almost kind of think like, the like super hyper edited short form stuff, for a lot of people, if it's really good content and it's done well, great. But like I could put out a video with just captions, no like extra crazy editing, and just have like a really pointed message that performs and has way more impact than like a random because this is what happens. Like you go, okay, I want to have 5 clips from this podcast, and you send it off to your team or whatever. And then they send you back and like 3 of the clips are just nonsense and it doesn't do anything. Like, okay, great. You made a clip, but the point of the clip, it doesn't, you're confusing me from the jump. Maybe you're putting me in a perspective. Maybe the conversation went like this and you're editing it like that, but maybe actually you should take this end part and put it at the beginning so that it makes more context for the person who's just watching the short form.
Yes.
Things like that.
That is such a big piece that's why I got burnt out of doing post-production. I was like, you guys aren't looking at the sentence. You're just looking at the motion and like the color and this and that. It's like, no, it makes no sense. That's why it doesn't perform.
Think about if you had no context for this entire conversation and you don't know who Robert is, you don't know who I am, you don't know what the fuck this podcast is, you know nothing, and you're throwing them in first time. That's what the majority of short form views are these days. Because if you look at like the percentage of people that your views come from, what percent are coming from people that follow you and what percent are like brand new viewers?
They're all brand new.
Most of the time they're brand new. And that's what's amazing about the current state of short form is if you reposition it as a free way to do top of funnel. So it's basically free organic top of funnel. You're showing it's your first touch point into someone's world, and they're kind of just serving it up.
Yeah,
we used to have to pay a lot of money for that.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously a lot of things have changed. Obviously from, when you first started to you working with Eddie at the 4Media, which is now Bad Marketing, and now your departure, man. So what does it look like for Andrew going forward through this content game, through podcasting? Talk about what you're working on now.
Totally. So basically right now just doing consulting, working with some brands, very similar to the type of work that I was doing before, but less done for you, more done with you. So I think a lot of times with like e-commerce brands, it's like, okay, they know content is important. Maybe they hire a couple people internally, but they don't really like know what that person needs to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe they're doing a bunch of video and photo shoots or whatever, but like, are they being as productive as possible? Like, okay, you're doing a shoot a month or, a couple shoots every week, but how much content are we actually getting out of that shoot? Like, what are we actually even doing? Do we have systems in place for all this stuff? What happens, this podcast even, there's going to be 3 SD cards that get dumped. There's audio that's going to get dumped. There's all these things. And it's like, well, what happens if something goes wrong in all of that? And it's like, you don't really think about those things in the beginning, but as you start to, depend on these things and, your media buyers are depending on consistent content, you need to make sure you have all the right systems in place and things like that. So that's what I'm kind of doing from a consulting side, is like setting people up for success, not really offering it done for you, like, hey, we'll come in and make your content, but helping structure things. And even like, I like sitting on calls with the content creators themselves. Like, hey, if you have creators in-house, like, I'll coach them, you know what I mean? And like, that's or like, you know, you want to hire someone like me, but you can't find someone like me. Hire someone who's like 50% of the way there, and I'll coach them. You know what I mean? And I think that's like even a better solution, because then you end up with someone on your team that's actually fully trained, and once they don't need me anymore, you've still got them. And I'm not in the day-to-day of the business, boots on the ground every day, and I'm able to help a bunch of different people. So I'm doing that for some agencies as well, agencies and directly working with brands. And then I'm also doing podcast consulting as well. Yeah, pretty much podcast consulting is kind of a weird one, because it's not every day that someone's like starting a podcast or knows about you at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like either they've already just started one and they maybe need some help, or maybe they've been thinking about starting one for a while. But I have a lot of thoughts about podcasting. And honestly, I really respect the setup that you guys have here and stuff like that. So it's I give my Andrew stamp of approval on this podcast. So if you want your podcast to look like this, hit me up.
Yeah, for sure. He'll definitely be able to help you a lot more. I just bought the stuff, so getting all this connected wasn't me by any means. So with that said, where can they find you to book a call with you, or at least learn more about that podcast consulting and other content consulting? Where can they find you? And then we'll obviously link everything in the description for socials, but where can they find you?
Best place is just my personal website, andrewdeitsch.com. The spelling will be somewhere on here, I'm sure. But there's a contact form where you can reach out to me there. It's pretty, there's only like a couple pages on the site right now, so it's a pretty navigable site. But yeah, andrewdeitsch.com is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome, man. Well, there you have it, guys. Mr. Andrew Deitsch himself, the man that's generated billions of views with content paid and organic. I hope that you got a lot of value. If you did, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and share. And if you do want to work with Andrew, go ahead and hit him up. He is the dude that has gotten billions of views for paid and organic, especially with your personal brand or e-com. So go ahead and hit him up, guys. With that said, I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.